Wyoming Territory, 1885. The parched summer wind swirled dust across Pine Ridge's Main Street as Quincy Vaughn rode into town, his shadow long in the setting sun. 3 years on the open range had hardened him like old leather, weathering his once boyish face into something closer to the granite of the mountains he'd called home. At 32, he wore solitude like other men wore their Sunday best, with practiced ease, if not genuine comfort. Another town, he muttered to his aging buckskin gelding. Another night of strangers. Quincy had been drifting since the cattle operation he'd worked for in Montana had folded. The railroad's advance had changed everything, making the long cattle drives less necessary each year. A man who'd spent his life in the saddle suddenly found his skills becoming as obsolete as arrowheads. The town of Pine Ridge had sprung up where the railroad met the mountains, drawing ranchers, merchants, and opportunity seekers alike to this corner of Wyoming Territory. It wasn't Quincy's first choice of destination, but his funds were dwindling, and the promise of the annual Founders' Day celebrations, with its lucrative riding competitions, had drawn him like a moth to flame. He guided his horse toward the livery stable at the end of the street, passing the usual fixtures of frontier life: the general store, a small bank, the telegraph office, and the inevitable saloon where piano music spilled onto the boardwalk along with raucous laughter. The livery owner, a grizzled man with a permanent stoop, looked up from his work as Quincy approached. "Evening," Quincy said, dismounting with the fluid motion of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. "Got space for my horse. And might you know where a man could find honest work around these parts?" The old man scratched his beard. "Stabling's 2 bits a night, feed included. As for work," he sized Quincy up with eyes that had seen 40 years of riders come and go. "You any good with horses?" Quincy nodded. "Raised with them. Broke wild Mustangs for the Circle M for 8 years. "Then you'll want to talk to Judge Miller. He's offering a fair purse in the riding competition day after tomorrow. And his daughters put up a special prize for whoever can gentle that black stallion he bought last month. Beast has thrown every man who's tried." Something stirred in Quincy, a flicker of interest that had been absent for too long. "Where might I find this, Judge?" "Big white house on the hill. Can't miss it." The stable master gestured toward the north end of town. "Though if it's the daughter you're thinking about, you'd best look elsewhere. Half the men in 3 counties have tried to court Miss Natalie Thornton. The other half were too smart to try." Quincy shook his head. Just looking for the competition, nothing more. Women weren't part of his calculations anymore, not since Sarah had chosen the banker's son over a man who lived by the seasons and slept under the stars. After securing lodgings at the modest boarding house on Elm Street, Quincy found himself drawn to the fairgrounds at the edge of town. Torches illuminated workers constructing a grandstand and corral for the upcoming festivities. A row of temporary stalls had been erected for the competition horses. He was about to turn back when he saw it. A magnificent black stallion, 16 hands if it was an inch, pacing its stall with the coiled energy of a storm cloud. Even in the fading light, Quincy could see the animal's perfect conformation, the powerful shoulders, the intelligent eyes that followed his approach. "He's something, isn't he?" The voice startled him. Quincy turned to find a woman standing a few feet away, her face half-shadowed by the brim of a modest riding hat. She wore a practical riding skirt and jacket of forest green, the tailoring fine enough to suggest means without ostentation. "He is indeed," Quincy replied, turning back to the stallion. "Too fine to be pent up like this." "That's what I've been saying." She stepped closer, and the torchlight caught her features. High cheekbones, a determined chin, and eyes the color of summer sage. "But father insists midnight needs to be conquered before he's worthy of our stable." Quincy raised an eyebrow. "You're Judge Miller's daughter?" A fleeting expression crossed her face, something between amusement and resignation. "Stepdaughter, actually. Natalie Thornton." She offered her gloved hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to moving in society, yet without pretension. Quincy removed his hat and took her hand briefly. "Quincy Vaughn, ma'am. Just rode in." "For the competition?" Her gaze was direct, appraising. "Yes, ma'am. Please, just Natalie." "Ma'am, makes me feel like someone's aunt." She turned back to the stallion. "Are you here to conquer him too?" The way she said it made Quincy study her more carefully. "I don't believe in conquering horses. Never met one that responded well to being broken that way." Something in her posture relaxed. Refreshing to hear. Most men around here think a horse is like a problem to be solved through force. Those men probably don't understand horses. Quincy stepped closer to the stall. The stallion's ears flicked forward, curious rather than aggressive. Or women, for that matter. Natalie said so quietly Quincy almost missed it. Before he could respond, she straightened and gestured toward the town. The competition starts day after tomorrow. Contestants need to register at the town hall by noon tomorrow. I'll be there. Quincy settled his hat back on his head. If you don't mind my asking, what's the story with this horse? Liveryman said he's thrown everyone. Natalie's expression clouded. Father bought him from a railroad man who claimed he was partially trained. But I think Midnight's been mistreated. He allows me to feed and groom him, but no one can ride him. No one's tried your way. I take it. Father doesn't consider my opinion on horses worthy of consideration. There was a carefully controlled bitterness in her voice. Hence the competition. Winner gets the horse and a handsome purse. Quincy nodded slowly. And what if your father's pride and joy ends up belonging to some drifter who rides out of town the next day? Then at least Midnight might have a chance with someone who understands him. She held Quincy's gaze for a moment longer than was strictly proper. Good night, Mr. Vaughn. I hope you find what you're looking for in Pine Ridge. As she walked away, her straight back and purposeful stride suggesting a woman accustomed to navigating a world that underestimated her, Quincy found himself intrigued despite his better judgment. Just the competition, he reminded himself. Nothing more. But as he made his way back to the boarding house, the image of sage-green eyes stayed with him, as did the black stallion's intelligent gaze. For the first time in years, Quincy felt something stir beyond the day-to-day concerns of survival, a flicker of anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. Morning revealed Pine Ridge as a town in transformation. Bunting-decorated storefronts and farmers from outlying homesteads arrived with wagons laden with produce for the festival market. Quincy registered for the competition, paying the modest entry fee from his dwindling funds, then set about learning the lay of the land. By midday, he found himself drawn back to the fairgrounds, where the black stallion had been moved to a larger corral. A small crowd had gathered to watch a cowhand's futile attempts to approach the horse, who snorted and paced the perimeter, ears flattened. Another volunteer for the infirmary, a man in an expensive suit, commented beside Quincy. Judge Miller's offering $10 to anyone who can get a saddle on that devil, just for practice. No takers so far today. Quincy studied the scene, noting how the cowhand moved, all aggressive confidence and sharp movements. The stallion's reaction was predictable, a mirror of the man's energy. I'll try, Quincy said, vaulting the fence before he could reconsider. The cowhand retreated, his face red with frustration and embarrassment. Your funeral, stranger. Quincy removed his hat and hung it on a fence post. Then he did something that caused murmurs in the small crowd. He turned his back on the stallion and simply stood, shoulders relaxed, in the center of the corral. He made no move toward the horse, offered no treats, made no calls. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Someone shouted a taunt that Quincy ignored. His attention was focused entirely on the energy he was projecting, calm, patient, unthreatening. Eventually, the stallion's pacing slowed. His ears, previously flattened against his head, gradually rose to a more neutral position. Quincy remained motionless, his breathing deliberately slow and even. 10 minutes became 20. The crowd thinned as people lost interest in the apparent non-event. But Quincy remained, and finally, the stallion stopped on the far side of the corral, regarding him with cautious interest. Only then did Quincy slowly turn, making no sudden movements. He extended his hand, palm down, not reaching for the horse, but offering a point of contact if the animal chose to approach. That's not how you handle a wild one, someone called. Let the man work, came another voice, female, authoritative. Natalie had arrived, standing at the rail in a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, which was secured in a practical braid. The stallion's nostrils flared, testing Quincy's scent on the air. After a long moment, he took a step forward, then another. Quincy remained still, his hand extended, his eyes steady but not challenging. When Midnight was within a few feet, Quincy began to talk, his voice a low, gentle rumble that carried no further than the horse's sensitive ears. The words weren't important, just the tone, the rhythm, the establishment of communication. Another step. Then the stallion stretched his neck, nostrils quivering, until his muzzle was inches from Quincy's palm. A collective breath was held by those watching. Contact, soft as a whisper, the stallion's muzzle brushed Quincy's hand. For several heartbeats, they remained thus connected, man and horse, neither dominating nor yielding, simply being. "Well, I'll be damned," someone whispered. Quincy slowly raised his other hand, telegraphing his movements, and gently stroked the stallion's neck. The horse tensed, but didn't pull away. "That's enough for today," Quincy said, stepping back and breaking contact first. A crucial point he'd learned from an old crow horse trader years ago. Never let the horse in the interaction. Always leave them wanting more. He walked backward to the fence, collected his hat, and exited the corral with the same unhurried movements. The stallion watched him go, head high but ears forward. "That was impressive," Natalie said as he approached. "Though I notice you didn't try for a saddle." "Wouldn't be right," Quincy replied, settling his hat on his head. "He's not ready, and forcing it would undo what little trust we just built." Judge Miller's stepdaughter studied him with those perceptive eyes. "Most men would have taken the $10 and the chance to show off. I'm not most men." He met her gaze without artifice. "And I respect that horse too much to use him for showing off." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Join me for coffee at the hotel restaurant? I'd like to hear more about your approach." Propriety suggested he decline. An unmarried woman inviting a stranger to coffee would raise eyebrows, but something in her direct gaze challenged conventional thinking. "I'd be honored," he said simply. The Pine Ridge Hotel's restaurant was modest by Eastern standards, but represented the height of local refinement. Heads turned as they entered, the judge's stepdaughter and the unknown cowboy, but Natalie navigated the social currents with practiced ease, selecting a table near the window where they could be observed by anyone passing, thus preserving appearances, while still allowing for conversation. Over coffee served in the hotel's best china, Quincy found himself sharing stories he hadn't revisited in years, of learning horse genitling from his grandfather, of the crow horse trader who'd taught him patience, of the years working the high country where a man's relationship with his horse could mean the difference between life and death. "You speak of horses as partners, not possessions," Natalie observed, her coffee cooling untouched before her. "That's rare in my experience." "Your experience seems broader than most women I've met," Quincy replied. My real father, was a horse breeder in Kentucky before he passed. He taught me everything he knew, treated me more like a son than a daughter in many ways." A shadow crossed her face. "When Mother remarried, we moved west for Judge Miller's appointment to the territorial court. He has different ideas about a woman's proper interests." Understanding dawned. Hence the competition for the stallion, rather than letting you handle him. "Exactly." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "Stepfather believes I need a husband to settle me down. He's approved 3 suitors, all sons of prominent ranchers. The stallion is partly a lure. Many of the local men have entered the competition hoping to impress me as much as to win the horse." "And you?" Quincy asked. "What do you want?" The directness of his question seemed to surprise her. "I want." She hesitated, then met his eyes with renewed resolve. "I want the freedom my father promised me before he died. My own breeding operation, the chance to prove what I know, and a partner who sees me as more than an ornament or a means to acquire property." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a well-dressed man whose expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as someone of means. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached their table. "Miss Thornton, what a pleasant surprise. Your stepfather mentioned you'd gone into town." Natalie's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Reynolds." "Yes, I'm taking refreshment before returning home." The man's gaze shifted to Quincy, taking in his trail-worn clothes and sun-weathered complexion with poorly disguised disdain. "And this is?" "Mr. Quincy Vaughn, one of the competitors for tomorrow's events," Natalie said with perfect composure. "Mr. Vaughn, this is Mr. Victor Reynolds, manager of the Pine Ridge Bank." Reynolds extended his hand with the reluctance of someone obligated to touch something distasteful. "Passing through, Mr. Vaughn." Quincy rose and shook the offered hand firmly, meeting the banker's gaze without deference. "That remains to be seen, sir." "Indeed." Reynolds turned back to Natalie. "I'll be escorting you to the opening ceremony tomorrow evening. as arranged with your stepfather. My mother has sent a gift, a shawl she believes will complement your gown. Natalie's smile remained fixed. How thoughtful. Please convey my thanks to Mrs. Reynolds. After the banker departed with a stiff nod to Quincy, Natalie sighed. Victor Reynolds is stepfather's choice. Old money, impeccable connections, and utterly convinced that horses are simply a means of transportation or sport. And the competition? If someone else wins the stallion. Stepfather believes no one will succeed with Midnight. The competition is meant to demonstrate that Victor's approach, selling the unmanageable beast for glue, is the sensible one. Her eyes met Quincy's, a challenge in their depths. But you might prove them wrong. Quincy considered her words carefully. Why tell me this? You barely know me. I know enough. She gathered her reticule and stood. I recognize a kindred spirit when I see one, Mr. Vaughn. Someone who understands that true partnership, whether with horses or people, isn't about dominance, but respect. As she left, Quincy remained seated, turning their conversation over in his mind. He'd come to Pine Ridge for a competition purse, and perhaps a magnificent horse. He hadn't expected to find himself drawn into the currents of local society, nor to feel such an immediate connection with a woman clearly beyond his station. Just the competition, he reminded himself again, but with far less conviction than before. The Founders' Day celebrations began at dawn with a cannon salute that echoed through the valley. Pine Ridge transformed into a bustling fairground, with contests ranging from pie baking to shooting, from quilting to bronc riding. Children ran with ribbons streaming behind them, and even the most dignified citizens seemed to have set aside their reserve for the day. Quincy spent the morning preparing for the afternoon events. The riding competition would be first, a test of skill, speed, and control, followed by the special challenge of the black stallion. He visited his buckskin at the livery, checking tack and ensuring the old companion was ready for the day's exertions. We've been through worse, he told the gelding as he brushed its coat to a soft shine. Though I can't recall when stakes felt higher. By midday, the fairgrounds were packed with spectators. Bleachers had been erected around the main arena, with a special viewing platform for the town's notables. Quincy spotted Judge Miller, a barrel-chested man with impressive side whiskers and the confident bearing of authority, seated beside a delicate woman who must be Natalie's mother. Natalie herself was conspicuously absent from the family grouping. He found her at the competitor's enclosure, dressed in a riding habit of deep burgundy that emphasized her auburn hair. She was speaking with a young stable hand, her expression serious. Mr. Vaughn, she said, noticing his approach. I was just ensuring that Midnight has been properly watered. The heat today is considerable. It is indeed, Quincy agreed, aware of the curious glances from other competitors. Will you be watching from the judge's platform? A faint smile crossed her lips. I've been assigned a seat beside Mr. Reynolds and his mother. A strategic placement by my stepfather. I see. Quincy adjusted his hat against the sun. Well, I should prepare. The riding competition starts soon. Mr. Vaughn. She hesitated, then spoke quickly. Whatever happens today, I want to thank you for showing kindness to Midnight. Regardless of who wins, that matters to me. The genuine emotion in her voice caught him off guard. It's nothing any horseman wouldn't do. But that's just it, many wouldn't. And don't. Her gloved hand briefly touched his arm, a gesture so quick it might have been imagined. Good luck today. The riding competition proved to be more challenging than Quincy had anticipated. 12 men competed in tests of speed, precision, and control. They raced barrels, demonstrated cutting maneuvers used in cattle work, and navigated an obstacle course that simulated difficult terrain. Quincy and his buckskin performed admirably, their years together evident in the seamless communication between rider and mount. When the judges tallied their scores, he found himself tied for first place with a local rancher's son, a young man named Thomas Farley, whose flashier style had impressed the crowd. Final test is the rope and ride, announced the master of ceremonies, a jovial man with a voice that carried across the arena. Each finalist will rope a specific calf from a group, then demonstrate control while herding it back to the pen. Speed and precision both count. The crowd roared their approval as Thomas Farley went first, his Palomino quarter horse exploding from the starting position. He roped his designated calf with practiced ease, then guided it back toward the pen with fluid grace. 1 minute, 42 seconds, the timekeeper called. An impressive showing. Quincy settled deeper into his saddle as he took position. "Steady, old friend," he murmured to the buckskin. "We've done this 1,000 times." At the signal, they burst forward. The buckskin, despite his years, moved with the precision that came from long experience rather than youthful energy. Quincy's rope flew true, settling around the calf's neck with gentle accuracy. Rather than yanking the animal off its feet as Thomas had done, he maintained just enough tension to guide without terrorizing. The calf, responding to the confident handling, trotted alongside as they headed for the pen. No wasted motion, no dramatic flourishes, just the efficient work of a man who'd earned his living this way for years. 1 minute, 38 seconds, the timekeeper announced as Quincy closed the pen gate. The crowd's applause was punctuated by appreciative whistles from those who recognized the skill displayed. Less showy than Thomas Farley's performance, but ultimately more effective. Judge Miller rose to shake Quincy's hand as he was declared the winner of the riding competition and its $50 purse. "Well done, young man," the judge said, his handshake firm. "Where did you learn to ride like that?" "Montana, sir, and before that, Colorado. I've worked cattle since I was 12. The judge nodded approvingly. "A working man, then. Refreshing to see real skill rather than just flash and show. Will you be trying your hand with Midnight next?" "Yes, sir. If the stallion's willing." "If the stallion's willing?" The judge laughed. "That's not how it works, son. Horse does what man commands. That's the natural order." From the corner of his eye, Quincy caught Natalie's expression, a carefully neutral mask that didn't quite hide her frustration at her stepfather's words. "Sometimes, sir," Quincy replied carefully, "what looks like submission is just cooperation. The best horses choose to work with us." The judge's eyebrows rose, but before he could respond, the master of ceremonies called for attention. The special challenge was about to begin. 6 men had registered for the chance to gentle Midnight. The rules were simple. Each would have 15 minutes in the round pen with the stallion. Anyone who could place a saddle on the horse's back and sit it for 30 seconds would win both the horse and a $100 purse. Thomas Farley went first, approaching with rope and cord in hand. His strategy was straightforward domination: corner the horse, throw a rope around its neck, and force submission. Midnight evaded every attempt, growing increasingly agitated until, at the 12-minute mark, he charged, sending Thomas scrambling over the fence to safety. The second competitor, a professional horsebreaker from Cheyenne, tried a more methodical approach, working the horse in circles until it began to show signs of tiring. But when he attempted to approach with a saddle blanket, Midnight's renewed fury sent him retreating as well. One by one, the competitors failed, each leaving the pen more frustrated than the last. By the time Quincy's turn came, the crowd's mood had shifted from excitement to a combination of disappointment and morbid fascination. Would this drifter fare any better, or would they witness another defeat? Quincy entered the pen carrying nothing but a simple halter. No rope, no whip, no spurs on his boots. He repeated his approach from the day before, standing quietly, allowing the horse to become accustomed to his presence. The crowd grew restless. Someone called out that he should do something. Judge Miller frowned from his seat of honor. 5 minutes passed before Quincy finally moved, and then it was only to begin a slow, deliberate walk along the perimeter of the pen, his movements smooth and predictable. Midnight tracked him, ears forward with interest rather than flattened in aggression. After 2 circuits, Quincy changed direction, moving in gradually decreasing circles. The stallion, intrigued, began to mirror his movements, maintaining a constant distance. 10 minutes into his allotted time, Quincy stopped in the center of the pen. Midnight stopped as well, regarding him with alert curiosity. Quincy extended his hand, palm down, as he had the previous day. This time, the stallion's approach was quicker, with less hesitation. When contact was made, that gentle touch of muzzle to palm, a ripple of surprise passed through the audience. "The halter now," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Get the halter on him." But Quincy didn't reach for the halter hanging from his belt. Instead, he slowly moved his hand to scratch the sweet spot behind the stallion's ear, then along his neck, establishing touch as a positive experience. Only when Midnight leaned slightly into the contact did Quincy bring out the halter, allowing the horse to inspect it thoroughly before gently slipping it over the proud head. No resistance, No struggle, just acceptance based on growing trust. With 12 minutes gone, Quincy led the stallion in a small circle, then paused and produced a folded saddle blanket from where he'd left it draped over the fence. Again, he allowed Midnight to inspect it, to smell it, to understand it wasn't a threat before placing it gently on the broad back. The crowd was utterly silent now, watching a masterclass in horse gentling that few had witnessed before. Judge Miller leaned forward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. With the blanket in place, Quincy reached for the saddle he'd positioned earlier. 13 minutes had elapsed. Working with calm confidence, he lifted the saddle, letting Midnight see and smell it before easing it onto his back. The stallion tensed but didn't bolt. Quincy waited, stroking the arched neck, murmuring reassurances. When the tension eased, he reached under to secure the cinch, tightening it just enough to keep the saddle in place. 14 minutes. Quincy led Midnight in another circle, allowing him to become accustomed to the weight and feel of the saddle. The stallion moved stiffly at first, then with increasing confidence. 14.5 minutes. Quincy positioned himself beside the stallion, one hand on the saddle, the other stroking Midnight's neck. With a fluid motion that contained no threat or surprise, he raised his foot to the stirrup and gradually applied weight. The moment of truth had arrived. Would Midnight accept a rider, or would he explode like he had with all previous attempts? The stallion's muscles bunched beneath the gleaming black coat. His head came up, nostrils flaring. Quincy paused, half on and half off, giving the horse time to adjust to this new pressure, this new experience. "Time's nearly up," the timekeeper called. With 15 seconds remaining, Quincy committed, swinging his leg over and settling gently into the saddle. Midnight's back hollowed, and for a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he might buck. Quincy sat deep and relaxed, communicating through his body that this new arrangement was nothing to fear. The stallion took one uncertain step, then another. Quincy moved with him, not directing, simply being a passenger on this first journey of partnership. 15 minutes, the timekeeper announced. Now 30 seconds in the saddle to win. Those 30 seconds stretched like hours. Midnight circled the pen once, his movements growing more confident with each stride. The crowd, initially holding its collective breath, began to murmur in appreciation of the miracle they were witnessing. 30 seconds complete, the timekeeper finally called. "We have a winner." The crowd erupted. Quincy guided Midnight to the center of the pen, then dismounted with the same gentle care with which he'd approached every interaction. He stroked the stallion's neck, offering praise and reassurance before leading him to the gate where Judge Miller waited, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Remarkable," the judge said, extending the envelope containing the prize money. "I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you, sir." Quincy accepted the envelope, then turned to face Natalie, who had moved to stand beside her stepfather. Her eyes shone with something that might have been pride, or perhaps something deeper. "The horse is yours now, Mr. Vaughn," the judge continued, "along with the purse. What do you intend to do with him?" It was the question Quincy had been asking himself all morning. He'd come to Pine Ridge for money and perhaps a fine horse to sell for profit. Now, with both in his grasp, he found his priorities had shifted. Before he could answer, Victor Reynolds appeared at Natalie's side, placing a possessive hand at her elbow. "Quite a show, Mr. Vaughn. I expect you'll be moving on now that you've claimed your prizes? I understand Cheyenne has several buyers who might pay handsomely for such a horse." There was challenge in the banker's voice and calculation. He wanted the drifter gone. That much was obvious to everyone within earshot. Quincy looked from Reynolds to Natalie, whose composed expression couldn't quite hide the question in her eyes, then to Midnight, who stood calmly beside him with the newfound trust of a being who had found someone who spoke his language. "Actually," Quincy said slowly, "I've been thinking about putting down roots. Wyoming territory seems like good country for a man who understands horses." Judge Miller's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? And what would you do here, Mr. Vaughn? Drifters don't typically become settlers overnight." "I've saved enough to make a start," Quincy replied, holding the judge's gaze. "With the prize money and a fine stallion, a man might begin a modest breeding operation. The railroad brings new settlers every day, and settlers need good horses." "A breeding operation requires land," Reynolds interjected, his tone dismissive, "and connections in the community." Starting from nothing is rarely successful. Not from nothing, Natalie said suddenly, her clear voice cutting through the tension. The Peterson place has been vacant since Old Man Peterson passed last winter. It's only 80 acres, but it has good water and decent grazing. And it's directly adjacent to my mother's inheritance from my father, the land that's held in trust for me until I marry. Judge Miller frowned. Natalie, this is hardly the time or place for such discussions. On the contrary, stepfather, this is precisely the time. She turned to Quincy, something like hope in her expression. Mr. Vaughn has demonstrated exceptional horsemanship and character. If he's considering establishing a breeding operation in Pine Ridge, I would be interested in discussing a business arrangement. A business arrangement? Reynolds repeated, his face flushing. Miss Thornton, your stepfather and I have already discussed. My fathers will specify that I would have control of my inheritance and the choice of how to manage it, Natalie interrupted with steel in her voice. He believed women capable of making sound business decisions, even if others do not. The judge cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of this conversation. Perhaps we should continue this discussion at home. Natalie, Mr. Vaughn, you're welcome to call tomorrow to discuss your plans. It was a dismissal, but also an unexpected opening. Quincy nodded, understanding the complex currents at play. I would be honored, sir. Thank you. As the crowd dispersed and Midnight was led back to his stall, now officially Quincy's property, Natalie managed a brief moment away from her stepfather's supervision. The Peterson place really would suit your purposes, she said quickly. It needs work, but the foundations are solid. I could show you tomorrow, after you meet with stepfather. Is that proper? Quincy asked, aware of the social boundaries he was already pushing. A smile touched her lips. We'll bring a chaperone. Mrs. Landry from the boarding house is a dear friend, and she understands more than most about the constraints placed on women. Besides, it would be a business discussion between neighbors. Neighbors? Quincy raised an eyebrow. Potentially. Her eyes held a challenge and something more. Unless you were planning to sell Midnight and move on after all. He thought of the open road that had been his home for years, of the freedom of having no ties, no responsibilities beyond himself. Then he looked at the remarkable woman before him, who had recognized something in him that he'd almost forgotten existed. No, he said with sudden certainty. I think I might have found a reason to stay. The Peterson place was indeed modest, a two-room cabin with a lean-to addition, a small barn that listed slightly to the west, and 80 acres of mixed grazing land and woods. But as Quincy rode the boundaries with Natalie and the indulgent Mrs. Landry the following afternoon, he saw its potential through new eyes. The creek never runs dry, even in August, Natalie explained, pointing to where the water cut through a stand of cottonwoods. And that south-facing meadow grows the sweetest grass in the county. My father, my real father, always said location matters more than size for a breeding operation. Your father sounds like a wise man, Quincy replied. They had paused their horses on a small rise that overlooked most of the property. Mrs. Landry, riding a gentle mare, had tactfully fallen back to examine some wildflowers, giving them a semblance of privacy while remaining in sight. Natalie's expression softened with memory. He taught me that horses are like people, each with their own personality, their own needs. He would have admired what you did with Midnight yesterday. High praise. Quincy studied her profile, struck again by the quiet strength she embodied. Your stepfather seemed more receptive to my staying than I expected. Natalie's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Mother spoke with him last night. She's quieter than I am, but she has her ways of influencing him. And she saw what everyone else saw yesterday, a man with rare gifts and integrity. The meeting at Judge Miller's imposing house that morning had been surprisingly productive. The judge, while clearly still hoping his stepdaughter would consider Victor Reynolds' suit, had grudgingly acknowledged that Quincy's skills with horses were exceptional. When Quincy had inquired about purchasing the Peterson place, the judge had offered to arrange favorable terms with the bank, which held the deed since Peterson's death. And what about your business proposition? Quincy asked, turning his horse to walk alongside Natalie's as they descended the hill. You mentioned a possible arrangement yesterday. Yes. She straightened in her saddle, her tone becoming more businesslike. My inheritance includes 20 prime breeding mares and the right to select 2 foals each year from my stepfather's stock. The land is good, 200 acres with excellent water, but it sits unused because I'm not permitted to develop it independently. And you're suggesting? A partnership. She met his eyes directly. Your expertise and Midnight's bloodline combined with my mares and land. We could create something exceptional. Horses bred for both beauty and practical work, the kind the New West needs. Quincy considered her words carefully. A partnership between an unmarried woman and a man would raise eyebrows in Pine Ridge. Yes. She didn't flinch from the implication, which is why I've proposed to my stepfather that any business arrangement would need to be formalized through marriage. Quincy reined his horse to a stop, genuinely surprised. You're proposing a marriage of convenience? To a man you barely know? Natalie turned to face him, her expression earnest. I'm proposing a partnership based on mutual respect and shared vision. I've seen how you work with horses, Mr. Vaughn. A man who understands partnership with animals understands it with people. I'm not naive enough to mistake our brief acquaintance for love, but I believe in building foundations on solid ground. And if the foundation never develops into more, then we would still have a worthwhile enterprise and the freedom to pursue our passion for horses. She hesitated, vulnerability briefly visible beneath her composed exterior. But I don't think that would be the case. Do you? The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. No, Quincy admitted. I don't think that would be the case at all. Something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had sparked from their first meeting. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Landry called from her position several yards away, though her tone suggested more amusement than censure. Perhaps we should return to town before the gossips have us planning the wedding already. Natalie's cheeks colored slightly. Mrs. Landry is right. We should return. She turned her horse toward the trail, then paused. Will you consider my proposition, Mr. Vaughn? Not just the business aspects, but everything it entails. Quincy nodded slowly. I will. Though I should warn you, a drifter doesn't bring much to such an arrangement beyond himself, and, in this case, one fine stallion. Sometimes, she replied with the hint of a smile, that's exactly enough. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Judge Miller, once convinced of Quincy's serious intentions toward both settlement and his stepdaughter, proved surprisingly helpful. The Peterson place was purchased with terms Quincy could manage, and repairs to the cabin and barn began immediately. Midnight settled into his new accommodations with the dignity of a king surveying his domain. Quincy spent hours each day working with him, establishing the foundation of trust that would make him not just a riding horse, but a partner in the breeding operation to come. Natalie visited often, always properly chaperoned, but increasingly comfortable in Quincy's presence. They spoke of horses, of bloodlines and conformation, of the operation they hoped to build. But they also spoke of themselves, of Quincy's childhood on a small farm in Illinois before striking out west at 16, of Natalie's dreams deferred but never abandoned, of the loneliness both had experienced in different ways. My father would have liked you, she said one afternoon as they sat on the newly repaired porch, Mrs. Landry knitting placidly in a rocking chair nearby. He valued competence above all else. And does his daughter share that value? Quincy asked, watching her face in the golden light of late afternoon. She does. Natalie met his gaze steadily. But she's discovering she values other qualities as well. Kindness, patience, the ability to listen. Their courtship, unconventional as it had begun, followed increasingly traditional lines as summer deepened into fall. Judge Miller, seeing his stepdaughter's happiness and recognizing Quincy's determination to prove himself worthy, gradually shifted from reluctant acceptance to cautious approval. Victor Reynolds proved less accommodating. The banker made his displeasure known through small obstacles, delayed paperwork for the property purchase, questions about loan collateral, thinly veiled comments about fortune hunters when Quincy was within earshot. But with Judge Miller's support and Quincy's growing reputation as a skilled horseman, Reynolds' influence could only reach so far. By October, with the aspen turning gold in the mountains and the first hint of winter in the morning air, Quincy had transformed the Peterson place into a functional, if modest, ranch. The cabin had a new roof and properly sealed windows. The barn stood straight again, with 4 solid stalls and a hayloft stocked for winter. Midnight had been joined by 2 purchased mares of good bloodlines, the beginning of what Quincy and Natalie hoped would become a noteworthy breeding program. It was on a crisp Saturday with the mountains sharp against a cloudless sky that Quincy rode into town for dinner at the judge's house, a weekly tradition that had developed over the past month. But this evening was different. In his pocket was a small box containing his mother's wedding ring, carried with him through all his wanderings as the one connection to his roots he'd never severed. Judge Miller answered the door himself, a departure from normal protocol that immediately put Quincy on alert. "Mr. Vaughn," the judge said, his expression grave, "I'm afraid dinner will be delayed. We have a situation that requires attention." In the parlor, Natalie sat straight-backed on a settee, her mother beside her with a comforting hand on her arm. Across from them, Victor Reynolds stood by the fireplace, his expression a mixture of triumph and concern. "What's happened?" Quincy asked, removing his hat as he entered. "Mr. Reynolds has brought some concerning information," Judge Miller said carefully. "About your past." Quincy's stomach tightened. He looked to Natalie, whose eyes held questions but not, he was relieved to see, condemnation. Reynolds stepped forward, a folded telegram in his hand. "As a banker, I have connections throughout the territory and beyond. I felt it my duty to inquire about a man who appeared so suddenly in our community and ingratiated himself with one of our most prominent families." "Victor," Mrs. Miller said softly, "perhaps this is not. The public has a right to know," Reynolds continued, "that in 1881, a man named Quincy Vaughn was wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of funds from the Circle M Ranch in Montana Territory." The room fell silent. Judge Miller looked to Quincy with raised eyebrows. "Is this true?" Quincy took a deep breath. "I worked for the Circle M from 1877 to 1882. In my final year there, the owner's son accused me of stealing from the payroll after money went missing. I was cleared when the actual thief, the foreman's nephew, was caught trying to leave the territory." "That's convenient," Reynolds said. "But my sources can be verified," Quincy interrupted firmly. "Sheriff James Hollister in Helena has the complete record. I stayed with the Circle M until it folded due to the harsh winter of '82 and the owner's poor investments. I have references from Mr. Mason himself, which I'd be happy to share." Judge Miller studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you mention this before?" "Because it was a painful chapter I'd rather forget," Quincy replied honestly. "Being accused of theft, even temporarily, isn't something a man advertises, especially when trying to establish himself in a new community." "There's more," Reynolds said, producing another paper. "According to my sources, Mr. Vaughn was also involved in an altercation in Butte that resulted in a man's death." Natalie gasped softly. Quincy felt the weight of her gaze, but kept his eyes on Reynolds. "That's true," he said quietly. "In 1883, I was working as a wrangler for a mining company. One night at a saloon, a drunk miner began harassing a young woman, barely more than a girl. When I intervened, he drew a knife. We struggled, and he fell, striking his head on a table edge. He died the next morning." "You killed a man," Reynolds said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "The territorial magistrate ruled it self-defense," Quincy replied steadily. "The incident is a matter of public record. I have the documentation in my personal papers." "Convenient again," Reynolds scoffed. "Documents can be forged." "They can," Judge Miller agreed. "But telegraph wires don't lie. I'll send inquiries to verify Mr. Vaughn's account." He fixed Reynolds with a pointed look. "And I'll expect you to do the same with your accusations, Victor." "Judge Miller," Reynolds protested, "surely you can't still be considering this man as suitable for your stepdaughter? A drifter with a violent past, a man defending a young woman from assault," Natalie interrupted, rising from the settee. Her voice was steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "A man falsely accused who was later exonerated. These are not marks against his character, but evidence of it." She crossed the room to stand beside Quincy, her action a clear statement of where her trust lay. "Unless there are accusations of actual wrongdoing, not just unfortunate circumstances, I believe we were about to have dinner." Judge Miller's stern expression softened slightly as he observed his stepdaughter's resolve. "Indeed we were. Victor, you're welcome to join us, of course." The banker's face flushed with barely contained anger. "No, thank you. I have other matters to attend to. But Judge, I strongly urge you to reconsider before you allow this connection to proceed further." After Reynolds departed, an awkward silence fell over the parlor. Mrs. Miller rose gracefully, her gentle voice breaking the tension. I'll check on dinner. It should be ready shortly. When they were alone, except for the judge, Natalie turned to Quincy. Is there anything else I should know? Anything Mr. Reynolds might discover and use against you? Quincy met her gaze directly. My life hasn't been perfect or easy. I've made mistakes, taken wrong turns. But I've never stolen, never harmed anyone who wasn't threatening me or someone else, and never broken a promise once given. Judge Miller cleared his throat. Mr. Vaughn, I appreciate your candor. While I'll verify your account as a matter of due diligence, I'm inclined to believe that a man's past actions should be viewed in context, not isolation. Thank you, sir. Quincy hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I came here tonight with a specific purpose. Recent events haven't changed my intentions, but they might have changed yours or your daughter's. He withdrew the small wooden box and turned to Natalie. I plan to ask for your hand formally tonight. If you need more time in light of what you've learned, I understand. Natalie looked from the box to his face, her expression thoughtful. When I proposed our partnership, I said I believed in building foundations on solid ground. That means knowing the full truth, not just the comfortable parts. She took the box from his hand, but didn't open it. I'd like to hear those stories, all of them, from you. Not because I doubt you, but because they're part of who you are. Quincy nodded, understanding what she was offering. Not blind acceptance, but the chance for complete honesty between them. In that case, Judge Miller said with surprising gentleness, perhaps I should join my wife in checking on dinner, leaving you two to begin that conversation. He moved to the door, then paused. 10 minutes, no more. Propriety must still be observed, even in exceptional circumstances. When they were alone, Natalie opened the box to reveal the simple gold band nestled inside. It was your mother's? Yes, the one thing I've carried with me through all my travels. Quincy took a deep breath. Natalie, I came to Pine Ridge looking for nothing more than a competition purse. I found something I didn't know I was seeking, a place to belong, a purpose that matters, and a woman whose strength and vision match her beauty. He took her hands in his. Our beginning may have been unconventional, but my feelings for you are deeper and truer than any I've known. I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife, to build not just a business, but a life together. Natalie's eyes shone with emotion. When we first spoke of marriage, it was as a practical arrangement. Now, Quincy prompted gently. Now I find that my heart has developed a most impractical attachment to you, Quincy Vaughn. A smile illuminated her face. Yes, I will marry you. Not just for the horses or the business, but for the man you are, past, present, and future. The kiss they shared was brief but filled with promise, of understanding, of partnership, and of a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. April 1886 morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the expanded cabin, now a proper ranch house with 4 rooms and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Quincy stood at the corral fence, watching as Midnight, now established as one of the finest breeding stallions in the territory, pranced proudly in the spring air. The past 6 months had brought more changes than the previous 10 years of his drifting life. The wedding in November had been a community affair, with even Victor Reynolds eventually offering grudging congratulations after Judge Miller's inquiries had verified every detail of Quincy's account. The winter had passed in a blur of contentment as they'd settled into married life, working side by side to prepare for the spring breeding season. Natalie's inheritance had been transferred to their joint management, and the combined properties now formed the foundation of what locals were already calling the most promising horse breeding operation in the county. Warm arms encircled his waist from behind. Admiring your handiwork? Natalie asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. Our handiwork, Quincy corrected, covering her hands with his own. Midnight was magnificent with the Thompson mare yesterday. If the foal inherits his conformation and her temperament, we'll have exactly the foundation stock we need. Natalie moved to stand beside him, her hair loose around her shoulders in the way he loved. Judge Wilson from Cheyenne sent a letter this morning. He's interested in 2 yearlings for his daughter's riding school. That's the 3rd inquiry this week. Quincy put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. Your father's prediction is coming true. Quality horses for the New West. Our vision, she corrected with a smile. Though I don't think either of us predicted quite how quickly things would develop. He nodded, understanding she meant more than just the business. Their marriage, begun as a practical partnership, had deepened into something neither had fully anticipated, a bond that strengthened with each passing day, each shared challenge, each quiet moment of understanding. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, wanting to be certain she never felt trapped by her choice. "Only that I didn't encounter you sooner." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Quincy, I have news." Something in her tone made his heart skip. "What is it?" Her hand moved to rest on her stomach, her smile blooming like the spring wildflowers on the hillside. "It seems our partnership will be expanding again. By winter, we'll have another voice in the house." Joy swept through him, bright and powerful as the Wyoming sun. He gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance. "A baby? Are you certain? Dr. Marshall confirmed it yesterday when you were in town." Her laughter rang out, pure and unrestrained. "He says everything appears healthy." Quincy set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Should you be out here, working with the horses? I could hire extra help." "Don't you dare," she interrupted, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Women have been having babies while working far harder than I do for centuries. Dr. Marshall says moderate activity is beneficial, and I'll be careful." He pressed his forehead to hers, overwhelmed with gratitude for this woman who continually surprised and delighted him. "I never imagined," he said softly, "when I rode into Pine Ridge last summer, that I would find everything I never knew I wanted." "A beautiful horse and the woman of your dreams," she teased, quoting what had become a private joke between them, how the Founders' Day competition had changed both their lives. "No," he replied seriously. "A partner, a purpose, a home." His hand joined hers over where their child grew. "And now a family." Across the paddock, Midnight raised his proud head and nickered, as if offering his approval of the unfolding scene. The stallion that had once thrown every rider who tried to dominate him now stood as the symbol of their shared philosophy. That partnership, whether between human and horse or between husband and wife, flourished best when built on mutual respect and trust. As they walked hand in hand toward the house, the morning sun warming their shoulders, Quincy reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From lonely drifter to husband, from wanderer to landowner, from man alone to father-to-be. Each step had seemed impossible until Natalie had shown him otherwise. "What are you thinking?" she asked, squeezing his hand. "That sometimes," he replied, "the most precious things in life come when you're not looking for them at all." She smiled up at him, the same sage-green eyes that had captivated him that first evening by the corral. "And sometimes," she added, "they're exactly what you've been searching for all along." Together they crossed the threshold of the home they'd built, into the future they would share, a future as wide and promising as the Wyoming sky stretching endlessly above them.